This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know. And we are back with another fabulous edition of Jews You Should Know. And again, as we did 2 weeks ago, when we featured Saul Werdiger of Outer Stuff, we are again coming to you from Toledo, Spain, where I recorded this interview with Anthony Moshal live. Really fascinating conversation, such an interesting background. Again, we took off last week celebrating my son Shalom's bar mitzvah. Thank God it was a very festive and joyous occasion. A great blessing to be able to celebrate that with many family and friends. And now we're back, and again featuring Anthony Moshal. Anthony is South African born, lives currently in the United Kingdom, and a really interesting story which took him through medical school and a brief stint practicing medicine, into business, the world of online gaming, online casino games, then into the world of real estate, venture capitalism, and ultimately profound impact in philanthropy, specifically in the areas of orphans in the former Soviet Union and Jewish outreach and education. I got to sit down with Anthony in Toledo, Spain a couple months ago, and finally bringing you that delightful conversation. I learned so much and was really quite inspired by his understated yet profoundly ambitious approach to life. And now to my conversation with businessman and philanthropist Anthony Moshal. And we are here with businessman and Jewish leader Anthony Moshal. How are you, Anthony?
Doing good, Ari. Doing good.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. We are here coming live, so to speak, from the Olami Global Forum, Global Leadership Conference, a very exciting convocation of 595 students from around the world, plus many, many other lay leaders and so forth. So great to speak with you here, and thrilled that you're here to join us.
Ari, good to be here.
Thank you. Anthony, tell us a little bit about where you're from. I believe that you currently live in Britain, but I hear a little South African accent in there. Is that correct?
Yeah. You can hear a lot of South African in there. I'm South African from Durban. It's a city on the coast. Lived in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and my wife and I and kids moved to London 13 years ago.
Wow! So you really made the rounds in South Africa. You hit all the cities with Jewish people in it, I guess.
Yeah, we hit the high spots.
You missed Pretoria? Is that one of the places?
Yeah, we missed Pretoria.
That's about it.
Yeah, didn't miss much.
That's it. So where were you actually born, and where was your main childhood?
Yeah, so grew up in Durban, which is a city on the coast. Good middle-class suburban background, kind of probably similar to growing up in Miami. Similar weather, similar lifestyle, different accent, good beaches.
Is it beautiful? You're on the Indian Ocean there? What is that?
Durban's on the Indian Ocean. It's cool. It's a surfing center of the world. Good beaches, good people. We had a community of about 5,000 Jews. It was a good place. Great childhood.
And what was the Jewish community like there? Because I know that very often South Africa was known to have very traditional communities, but not necessarily strictly observant. What was your experience?
Yeah, so South Africa was always a very traditional community. To kind of summarize it, we'd drive to shul on a Friday night and park around the corner. God forbid we'd park in front of the shul. That just wasn't done. We'd make kiddush on a Friday night and go shopping or go to the beach on Saturday. That was kind of how it was. Very traditional, respectful. It's an interesting place. Reform never made inroads into South Africa. South Africans are mainly Lithuanians. We Litvaks. So we expected our rabbis to be rabbis, and we kind of knew what a rabbi should look like. And, somebody once asked a question, to a South African rabbi, what would happen if you drove to shul on a Shabbos, even though his community all drove themselves? And the answer is, well, Saturday night he'd be fired. So there was a kind of recognition of what was authentic, even though we didn't really hold by it ourselves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you grew up in that very, as you said, South African milieu. Did you feel strongly identified Jewishly?
Yeah. I mean, we felt very Jewish. Durban specifically was quite a small community. We had one Jewish school system, so went to Jewish nursery school, Jewish primary school, Jewish high school, which probably most of the community did as well. And we sort of grew up very strong Zionists, very Zionistic. We didn't learn too much about Judaism. We knew a lot about the Holocaust, but not too much about what it meant to be Jewish. But I think that a lot of what I got Jewish-wise I got from home, from my parents.
Did you visit Israel early on?
My first trip to Israel was when I was 12, and then since very often. So South African Jews tend to be very connected to Israel. That's a big part of their identity. And part of that was South Africa's gone through some tough times, and the South African mentality is that the country is always on the edge of a precipice. It's been like that since the 60s. So the concept of needing a place to go to or escape to is always a strong thing, which is not necessarily a very positive way to look at one's Judaism or Zionism, but that was a reality.
Wow.
Yeah, good place. Good place.
I've never been, but I gotta take a tour at some point.
You got to go.
Hit the bush.
Go in summer.
In the summer, okay, which is actually the winter, right?
Yeah, go in your winter. It's our summer.
There you go.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
Tell me to go in the summer. I'll take you literally, and I'll be freezing.
Having said that, the winters in Durban are better than the summers in London.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess London rains every day, so.
Yeah, not every day. Most days.
So, what ultimately brought you to Great Britain? Did you? I assume you went to college in South Africa. When did you start to move in a different direction?
Okay, so as I say, grew up in Durban, went to a Jewish school. Ended up studying medicine in Cape Town. I thought that it was a good way to help people. Little did I know, the last thing that you want to do if you want to help people is do medicine.
Why do you say that?
As my brother says, when I gave up medicine, I saved a lot of lives. And I think I probably, by giving up medicine, I did save lives. And just to kind of segue into that, one of the main reasons I went into medicine was I wanted to help people. And that is probably why I left. I figured rather get into business, be successful, and kind of make an impact through that route.
Philanthropy.
Through philanthropy, and thank God that's been successful. We've, had a good run in business and managed to really get involved in some seriously good, high-impact projects.
Now, of course, that's a risky proposition because not every person who gets into business, makes it on the scale that they can really make that broad impact. Even if not even a failed business, you might just make enough to support your family. But to go into business with the purpose of becoming a philanthropist is a tenuous proposition, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's a tenuous proposition. I think part of the advantage of naivety and ignorance is that you kind of do stupid stuff because you don't know that that they're stupid. And, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And that's muzzle. I had a few, after transitioning from medicine into business, via a stint in consultancy, I started a few businesses which failed, ultimately got into business with my brother in the online gaming space, which, thank God, was successful. But there's no guarantees. And I think the key to the whole thing is really focusing on what your abilities and strengths are and having clear goals.
When you left medicine, were you in the middle of medical school or had you already finished it?
No, I practiced as an MD for about 2.5 years.
Did? Wow.
Emergency medicine, so the stuff where you get people come in either stabbed or shot or
triage,
can't breathe, all that kind of stuff. So did that for about did emergency medicine, bit of neurosurgery, delivered babies, and then thought this is not my game at all.
Were you not enjoying it? Were you not feeling fulfilled? I mean, what about it? Obviously, again, it sounds like you wanted to make like this broader impact, but were you feeling dissatisfied with that career?
Part of the problem I had is I kind of had this notion I wanted to help people. So I went into medicine. In second year, we had a lecture by a professor of immunology who pointed out that if we wanted to save lives and help people, we really are in the wrong job. We'd probably actually kill more people than we save.
Really? That's a pretty bold statement.
I think I don't know how many people are saved, but I kind of got to probably, probably a few that slip through and
Because
kind
of what, misdiagnosis or?
People generally come into hospitals pretty sick, and never go to hospital. People die there.
Right. But that's not because of the doctors. That's
quite often it is. Sometimes they miss things. Sometimes they don't pick things up. I mean, I remember a few cases where, in retrospect, could I have done more? Could I have done better? I think you can always do better,
right.
or you can sometimes do better. Anyway, so as my brother said, I probably saved a lot of lives by leaving. And so anyway, to get back to my professor, he said, if you really want to help people and save lives, hand out vaccines in Africa. If you really want to do stuff, do it on a big scale. If you're going to be using your own two hands to do stuff, you're going to be limited. And I think that's independent of financial success or anything. Arguably the biggest donor to the Jewish world was Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, who was recently NIFTA.
Yeah.
Who was a rabbi. He had a TV show. He raised hundreds of millions or billions over his lifetime and gave it away. He didn't go into business. He wasn't a successful businessman, but he was arguably the most successful Jewish philanthropist in the last 10 years, last 20, 30 years maybe, apart from Mr. Zev Wolfson maybe.
Interesting.
So the whole trick here, I think, is really knowing yourself. And if I can tell you a story that I had with Mr. Eli Horn, which will kind of guide this.
Sure. We'll be talking to him later today, so...
Okay, so even better than listening to my story about Eli Horn is listening to him. But just an anecdote that I can share, which really clarified to me what the whole ikar of this thing is. So about 4 years ago, I had a meeting set up with Mr. Horn in London. He was flying in from Brazil. And the agenda of the meeting was to discuss some joint projects that we had. We've been supporters of JLE in London, Asia Torah in South Africa, Asia in the UK. Did I say awesome in South Africa?
Did not, but that's an awesome...
So it's an awesome mistake. Awesome in South Africa. And anyway, so the agenda was really to follow up and see how we're doing. Well, that's what I thought the agenda was. So I came in prepared to discuss that. I came with one of my fellow trustees of our foundation, a very close friend, Damon Hoff. Anyway, Mr. Horn had just flown overnight from Brazil. We met at about 7:30 at the Langham in the West End in London. And Mr. Horn was waiting. He was already wearing a suit. He was looking much sharper than we were, that time of day. And we sat down, and I expected to launch into discussion about these various programs. And he looked me in the eye, and he asked me, where was I before Hashem created the universe? So I looked at my friend Damon, and I said, Damon, kind of help me. I've got no idea what this mogul from Brazil just asked me. What is this? So he said to me, look, he asked you, not me. You're on your own here. So I said, I answered, I imagine I was part of Hashem. He says, yeah. He says, you must have been, you were. Before Hashem created the universe and everything, there was only Hashem. You must have been there. I said, fine. And he carried on. He said, if Hashem created the universe in such complete precision and perfection and set up everything just right, otherwise nothing would exist, when it came to creating you, do you think he just threw the dice and created you randomly? Or do you think that he made you for a specific purpose? So I kind of thought this is an easy answer. He must have. Hashem must have put me here for a reason. And he said, okay, fine, right. He says, what are you here for? Why are you here? And at that point, I just threw up my arms and I said, I actually don't know. I'm not sure. And at that point, I realized what real clarity was. He was so clear about why he was here and what his mission is. He said he came to the conclusion that Hashem put him in the world to stop intermarriage, to keep Jews Jewish and to educate Jews to want to be Jewish and stay Jewish. That's his mission. The fact that he's a billionaire, the fact that he was born into a certain time and place in history, to the parents that he was for this mission to keep Jews Jewish. He had complete clarity. And I think that even asking the question, why am I here and what are my talents and what am I put here for? Even asking the question before you even get to answering it, you're already in the 1% of the world who either has the privilege of being able to ask the question or has even thought of it. And that was a real clarifying moment to me to help me focus in terms of what I'm here for. And implicitly, I think that this is what I've been searching for and what I've probably done throughout my whole life. But he had really articulated this in an eloquent way, in a very meaningful, real way. What is my purpose? And I think that if everybody can ask themselves that question and really think it through and be open and honest with themselves and apply that is essentially leadership. All that Hashem can actually ask from us, or that he does ask, is know what we have, know what our talents are, know what we're here for, use his guidance to guide us and fulfill our potential. And that's leadership, using it in the time and place that we are now to our full potential. If you can do that, then we're here for the right reason, and that's Jewish leadership.
Beautiful. I want to ask you a little bit about failure, because if you look at the early beginnings of your career, or careers, perhaps we should say, it sounds like it was one of not of success. And in particular, medicine, you invested so much, I imagine. I mean, I don't know the South African medical training process, but in America, it's 4 years of college and 4 years of med school and then a residency and a fellowship, etc. Maybe it's a little bit less than South Africa, but it's a major investment. And then to pull away from that after a couple of years, and then to go into business, which doesn't succeed immediately. How did you deal with those things? Were those difficult times for you, or did you always kind of have your eye on the ball and say, I'm going to make it big in business and, I'm not worried about the past?
Yeah. So a question which often comes up, friends ask me and family, do I regret doing medicine? And in South Africa, how it works, similar to the UK system, there's a 6-year program. It's there is no undergrad. It's a one long 6-year program, really pre-med and clinical rolled into one. And I went into it, as I said, wanting to help people. About halfway through, I figured out this is really not my thing. Don't feel any passion for it. And I just can't go through my life, without feeling at least some direct personal involvement with what I'm doing.
Why didn't you pull out then?
It's a good question. If I pulled out, you kind of get to a point of no return. If I'd done a pre-med and a med school like in the US, I would have come out with a degree. If I dropped out in third or fourth year, I would have come out with nothing. So it was a pragmatic decision. I carried on, and you kind of never know how, why you do things. The question comes up often, do I regret it? About 8 years ago in Jerusalem, something happened where I realized that if only for this is the reason I did medicine. It was an Erev Shabbos. We had just moved into a new home in Jerusalem, which had just been restored. My 12-year-old daughter was getting ready for Shabbos. This was on a Friday afternoon. This was Erev Shabbat Hagadol. So we were in Israel for Pesach. And she was in the bathroom. She stepped out of the shower to close the door, which had some very old glass panes in it. One of the windows shattered, and basically a shard of glass stabbed her in her leg. I heard screaming. I ran in, and I found blood gushing out of her leg, literally like water pouring out of a tap. If I hadn't been there on the spot within 30 seconds, she wouldn't have made it. So do I regret medicine? Not for a second. We kind of guided, God runs the world. We don't know why we end up doing what we do. If it was only for that 30 seconds that I went through 6 years of medical school, it was worth it. Like, I'd do it 100 times over. So we don't know. We just don't know. And there've been other stories as well, but, being a bit facetious, I probably did save a few lives as well, other lives along the way. I don't think that I really killed anyone, or certainly not that I was aware of. But, don't regret it for a second.
Incredible. And then these early business failures, as you described them, what do you attribute those to? Do you think that was just lack of experience, or just some businesses don't have the muzzle and sometimes they do?
It's a funny thing. I after transitioning from medicine to business by spending 3 years working for a consulting firm, monitor company out of Boston, I started a few businesses which failed. I'm far more comfortable discussing my failures because there's a lot more of it. And I remember them more than the successes. I think really what life is about is you're going to be doing a whole lot of things and trying things, trying business ideas, business concepts, whatever it might be, and some will work and some won't. Some of them might be misjudgment. You might have just made a mistake in understanding the opportunity, or there just simply was no opportunity. Other times, there are competitors who do it better. Sometimes you just can't execute. I mean, there's one business I wanted to start. At the end of apartheid in South Africa, there were tens or hundreds of multinationals scrambling to re-enter South Africa post-sanctions. I'd just come out of a 3-year stint in consulting. I thought I was perfectly placed to help companies come in, entry strategies, understanding the local market, competitive environment. And I really could have done a lot of the work or figured out a lot of strategies for these companies coming in. What I realized is that I just simply couldn't sell the work. I couldn't find people prepared to pay for it. It is a great lesson for me. Went in, with complete conviction that this was a great opportunity, and realized I simply couldn't find a channel to sell into. I couldn't sell projects. It might be that I'm a bad salesman. It might have been that it was just simply I misconstrued the opportunity, but I simply couldn't sell. And so that business closed down. And then tried a few others as well, worked incredibly hard. It was often just a brick wall for various reasons. Again, it might have just been bad strategy, bad concept, bad execution, or bad muzzle, And then, thankfully got into business, which was really a rising tide, which was online gaming. And we managed to sort of float a boat in that rising tide, and thank God we did it right.
I want to talk about that. I just wanted to ask if at any point did you consider returning to medicine? You had this amazing fallback option while these businesses are failing. Did you ever think about going back? No,
I just kept pushing on.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I just it was a fallback which I would have gone back to if necessary. But at that point, I wasn't, I was thinking, okay, so I failed, I'm going to try something different.
Did you have a family yet at this point to support?
I had a wife who was supporting me a lot of the time. So it was a team effort. It really was a team effort. Lauren and I had been married for, by the time I got into the gaming business, we had one kid, had a daughter. But she was working and sometimes supporting me, sometimes I was supporting her, but it was a team effort.
So now tell me a little bit about the gaming industry and what you've done there. Is that online poker, things like that, or is it more fantasy sports?
Yeah, no. So we failed dismally in online poker. We did.
So have many others, by the way. At least the players.
Yeah. Some of them did well.
Yeah, I should say, I know a student. I work at University of Maryland, and I had a student once who came to college at about 22 years old, something like that. And why are you starting so late? He said, well, I made $1 million playing online poker. So, and it was fascinating to hear him describe how he would, sit in a room with multiple monitors and he'd be playing multiple games at once, and basically a game of, volume play. And he would just play so many hands that he was making serious amounts of money. Yeah,
it was a funny thing. There was a time in the industry when there were very good poker players in the States playing against basically housewives in Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, Denmark specifically. So you had these fish being gobbled up by sharks. So some guys did do really well. And what happened really, they were taking advantage of the time zones. And during the working day in America, they were playing against these ladies there, or during early morning in the States, they're playing during the day against these ladies.
Wow, interesting to hear that.
It was an interesting dynamic. Anyway, so we were in the online casino business. I was in a business which did marketing and back-end services for online gaming. It became... we started out really at the infancy of the industry, so we were there almost from the beginning. A lot of South Africans, a lot of Canadians, a few Israelis, quite a Jewish industry. It was a very, good, close, tight bunch of guys. We got friendly with a lot of our competitors in different places, and we had very few American competitors. We came in at an interesting time in the industry, where my brother had figured out there's this opportunity at the birth of e-commerce to sell virtual services, and he figured out that online gaming would be a virtual service where we could basically do business around the world without having to ship anything, and we got into that way. But we were in this unusual area where our potential American competitors couldn't get into the industry because they had licenses. So
regulation issues.
Yeah, so there's an issue of regulation. The big incumbent casinos, the land casinos, had licenses which precluded them from going online.
Is it the Indian reservations largely, or the Vegas?
No, it is Vegas and Atlantic City, yeah. And the reservations. So essentially, their licenses, which are given to them by the various states or gaming authorities in the various states, precluded them from unregulated gaming activity. If they, for example, if Steve Wynn was involved in unregulated gaming in Uzbekistan, he would lose his license in Vegas. It was a crazy thing.
Wow.
But he didn't have to be involved in illegal gaming in Uzbekistan. If it was even unregulated, he'd lose his license in Vegas. So that kept the big guys out, and it gave us a real shadow for about 5-6 years to get into the industry. And Americans were generally a bit non-gaming guys were just generally cautious about gaming in the US. But the area that we operated in was legal and unregulated, which allowed us to operate. And basically, we had a free run at, obviously, with our competitors at building an industry in the US.
Right. So basically, people would go online to play various types of casino games, but just doing it online.
Yeah. So instead of getting in, if you live in LA, instead of getting into your car and driving to Vegas or Reno, you'd basically log in online and play against our servers, which were sitting actually in Canada. So the most state regulations in the US deemed that the gambling happened at the server, not where the player was. So we had licenses in various jurisdictions, and we were operating comfortably within state and federal law.
How has that industry changed over the years? And I think the United States, I know sports gambling has become legalized, I think at the federal level in the U.S., and many states are legalizing it. Is that? Were you involved in that at all, in any bookmaking on the athletic side?
No. So I'm not current. I can really talk about sort of from up until about 10 years ago. I sold out about 12 years ago. So sports gambling in America was always illegal. So online sports gambling was illegal. So we stayed clear of that. We only did casinos. Subsequently, what happened is in 2006, a law was passed to prevent gambling on college sports, which effectively closed down our banking relationships in America. So we actually pulled out of America in 2006. So industry changed completely from America being 98% or 95% of our business. It went to zero. That wasn't fun. We had to reinvent ourselves and get into Europe and Asia. So we had a few, it wasn't all, roses, the whole way. It did get a bit tough.
Did you ever struggle with any of the moral questions of being involved in gambling? As a Jew, obviously, Judaism is not super favorably disposed to gambling. Did you ever feel that way, or did you feel that you were just a service provider and people have their discretion to, just like you could sell alcohol to someone and they could abuse it or use it in moderation? Did you feel kind of, the same way about gambling? Did you ever confront those moral questions?
Yeah, so it's a good question. There was the approach that we had, and again, when I went into the industry, at that point, I'd call myself a traditional Jew. We weren't observant, but we actually did ask a question. I asked a question of the person who became chief rabbi in South Africa, a good friend, Rabbi Warren Goldstein.
He's been on the podcast.
Okay.
Shabbat Project.
So I asked him out for lunch, and I asked him. He'd been my rabbi in Johannesburg for a few years already. This is probably 10 years before he was chief rabbi. So I asked him this specific question. Can I go into this business? Is it okay? And he gave a halachic response to it. I'd spoken to him on the phone before, and he said, let's get together for lunch and discuss it. And essentially, if we as the casino were not gambling ourselves, if we weren't extending credit, and if we were being transparent about the odds of the player winning or losing, on that basis it's permittable to be in that industry. So the question is it the business that are we bringing the benefit and pleasure of online gambling to the world? You can argue maybe we weren't creating tremendous value in the world. Were we providing entertainment? Yes, we saw this as really another form of entertainment, not too dissimilar maybe to going to theatre or movies. We were very aware of the risk, and my medical background, made me even more sensitive to this addiction and problem gaming, which was a concern. We did a lot of work in this area, along with some of our competitors in the gaming industry. We set up programs to identify problem gamblers, and were able to lock them out of not only out of our own casinos, but out of the industry completely.
Which is hard to do because you're essentially shooting your best customers in the foot. It's like if somebody buys a lot of hamburgers or something at your restaurant, and you keep them out of your restaurant after 2 weeks of hamburgers.
Yeah, yes and no. Problem gaming, the level of addiction, studies show that it's probably about 0.5% of people that are addicted to gaming. Problem gamers, we put at a high number, probably around 2%. So 2 in 100 people really couldn't control their behavior, or were either couldn't control the behavior and were compulsive gamblers, or were playing more than they should have. We just closed them out, gave the money back, and closed them out. It really wasn't it wasn't even a question of how many there were. It was a question of what's the right thing to do. Yeah. And we had no intention at all of taking money from people that couldn't afford it or were in over their heads. Yeah. So if you're selling hamburgers, you're selling something that's cost you something. If somebody's gambling your site, you just give them the money back and close them out. And what was interesting is because we were online, we could identify them. So
to trend the patterns.
Yeah. So we'd identify them through a pattern. Very often they would say, listen, it was there'd be a pattern of how they'd present. They might say it was the kid who was using their credit card, or their wife, or stolen. As soon as we figured out what the story was, generally it was a problem gamer. We'd identify them through their name, address, zip code,
ISP.
ISP, hard drive, serial number. Even if somebody came in with a different name, different address, different social security number, if we picked up that they had the same hard disk serial number, we could lock them out. And by creating a shared database with our colleagues at competing gaming companies, we could actually close them out completely. Wow. So we kind of felt that we were doing a pretty good job of it. In the land casinos, somebody could always, if they were locked out of the sands for being a problem gamer after having self-identified, because the casinos would have photographs of people that shouldn't be in there, or that were problem gamers, you could walk down the street and go somewhere else. Right. I think we did a pretty good job in the industry, as an industry, of helping these people and getting them out of, or making it much harder for them to go online and play.
It sounds like your life has been one of many transitions, and from the medical to the business and various businesses. And you alluded to some other transitions that I want to touch on as we start to wrap up. You had described that you were at one point a more, what do you call, traditional or South African style Jew, and it sounds like over time you perhaps have become more observant. And you also indicated that you sold out of the business a number of years ago. I'd like to hear about who you sold to. Or did you just sell to your brother, or did you guys jointly sell to another corporation? And then what have you been doing since then? Has it been all philanthropy and so forth?
Okay, there's a few questions in there.
Yeah.
I'll deal with some of the, I think, more interesting ones first. So how did we end up getting observant? My wife and I were living in Johannesburg. This was in the late 90s. Lauren, my wife, was pregnant with our first child. And I remember quite clearly I was driving along a street in Johannesburg, and my father called me on my mobile, and said, "Good Yontiv." And I said, Yeah, good Yontiv. Just remind me what Yontiv is it? He said, no, today's Shavuot.
Wow.
So, and I was embarrassed to think that, I've got a wife pregnant with a child, and I actually can't remember the difference between Sukkot and Shavuot. 12 years in a Jewish day school, and then sort of a number of years at university, and out and about, and I actually didn't know the difference between Sukkot and Shavuot. And at that point, I realized if I had any chance of keeping our not yet unborn child Jewish, my wife and I had to really go back in and up our game. My father had always drummed into us, don't expect a school to educate your kids for you or bring your kids up. You've got to do it yourselves. So at that point, we made a decision. We're going to start learning. We're going to learn a bit more about our heritage. Johannesburg was a booming place in terms of learning. We joined Warren Goldstein's shul, the youth minyan at Waverley Shul. That was so we became close friends with Warren and Gina. They had a kid, Morty, who was just a few months older than our oldest Kira, and we became friends and went to Warren Shirim. Started learning with Rabbi Chaim Willis Adesh. Went to an Arachin seminar.
The famous Rolling Stone article.
Yeah. I hadn't read the article before I met him.
His sister passed away.
Yeah. So a very special man, very special people in Johannesburg. So we had no intention at all of becoming frum. That was the last thing in our minds. We had friends who had kind of been on a journey that were observant, and one thing led to another, and next thing we knew, we were slowly transitioning to keeping a kosher home, and stopped working on Shabbos, and you stopped using the phone on Shabbos, and stopped driving, and the next thing we were keeping Shabbos.
Wow.
And that was Johannesburg in the 90s and early 2000s.
Did you move to England because of more greater Jewish opportunities?
No, we moved to England for two reasons. One is business. So the centre of the gaming industry at the time was in the UK.
Interesting.
And we had a lot of work going on there. And another bit of a push was my wife and I separately within a few weeks were held up at gunpoint in Johannesburg, and we thought, this is not so cool. Don't really want to live looking over our shoulders all the time, and we moved to England.
I thought as long as you don't stop at red lights, you're okay. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, but sometimes the hijackers wait for you at home.
Okay.
It's not always red lights. Anyway, so after I got hijacked with a friend and our kids, I felt a bit uneasy, but not too bad. After my wife got hijacked with our 2-year-old son Jacob at the time, I freaked out completely.
Sure. And
figured this is not a way to live and time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that was it.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about where you're at now, business wise, and you said you sold the company.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, business had thankfully started doing well. And I transitioned out of gaming into other areas that my brother and I were doing, which was real estate and VC, and that's really been a big focus. Now we've been in financial services, internet financial services, which has been pretty good, and then real estate, which has been far more pedestrian, a big change in pace. After being in online where you'd experiment with an idea, you'd try a new idea, you'd literally get it going, talk about it one day, the next day you'd be executing it, and the next day you'd see how it's doing, or even later that day, to real estate where things work in sort of multi-year cycles. It was a real change of gears, but thankfully, we've had some siyata d'shmaya there as well.
What kind of real estate are you doing? Commercial?
Yeah, doing mainly commercial real estate.
Retail or office?
Commercial offices. So doing offices mainly Europe and mainly in the UK and South Africa. But predominantly in the UK, which has been interesting with Brexit.
Interesting. And in the US, I know that the office real estate market has been difficult in some places because of the preponderance of people working at home and the ability to not need an office anymore for many people. Has that been a challenge in some of these other places?
It has kind of been a challenge, but not really. I think that this idea of working from home or co-working like we work is a new trend. I think this is probably a secular trend away from big corporate office space. So there's a kind of a re-rating. A bigger thing in the UK really is the demise of shopping centres in the high street. The high street being sort of the local retail shopping areas.
Because of online?
Yeah, online has basically destroyed shopping centres. The UK has been at the forefront of this trend.
Wow.
Europe is following, and America I think is quite far behind, but going the same way. That online has just really destroyed shopping centres.
Now the big box stores are just dying out. And
Yeah, well, it's more than big box stores. It's clothing. It's pretty much everything is being destroyed by online.
yeah. Wow.
So that's been a trend. And then offices. We've done a lot of office space, and it's essentially the UK has two markets. There's London, which is basically a global city, similar to say Hong Kong or New York, which is really independent of the rest of the UK. So there's kind of two countries in the UK. There's London, and then there's not London. We've done some stuff in London, but really it's been booming for the last 10 years, so no opportunities. Meanwhile, the north of England, places like Liverpool and Sheffield, areas near London, Milton Keynes, have really got smashed in 2008, and we took advantage of some of the opportunities.
To buy
then.
low.
Yeah, but well, you never know if you're buying low, you might end up selling lower. That's out of your control. But we generally bought what we thought was low, and for most of the time we were right, and things bounced back in some of those cities. And I did, buying low, selling high. That's kind of worked for us.
That's always a good approach if we're trying to make money.
Well, I mean, it's a good approach in theory. The trick is really making it work.
Doing it. So just tell us a little bit about your philanthropy and what drives you. We started out by saying how invested you've been in. You mentioned HUK and JLE and Orsum in South Africa and many different causes. What are some of the things that really drive you in that arena, and how much of your time do you spend on that?
I probably spend about a half or a third of my time on projects. In 2000, my brother and I set up a foundation called Yad Mordechai to deal with our charitable
Is that
dealings.
named after your father? Or?
Named after my father's late father. Thank God my father and mother are around.
Wonderful.
So named after my father's late father, Max, who was a very generous person. And we set up with three trustees, myself, very good friends in South Africa, Mike Setzer and Damon Hoff. Yeah. Damon has now moved to London. And basically we try to figure out what our objectives should be. And we did a trip to Israel to meet with the Gedolim. And we came after meeting with really the sort of leaders of our generation who predominantly said that we should be supporting Torah. And then exactly which, how and where that was really debatable or subject to discussion. Rav Moshe Shapiro said to us the first thing we should do is save lives, physically then spiritually, and Torah obviously has got to be a priority. What we came away with was thinking, hang on a sec, we've got to find a project where we can actually save lives, and it wasn't so easy to find that, but we did. I'll get to that now. And then it became clear that if we want Jews to be Jewish in 500 years, the only way to do that is supporting Torah. That, by definition, is what keeps Jews Jewish. And sitting here in Spain, where we're doing the podcast, we saw what happened after the Inquisition and the expulsion. Jews who tried to hide their Yiddishkeit and took Torah out of their lives stayed culturally Jewish at home for a few generations, but the Yiddishkeit has almost completely disappeared. And that, you understand, if you look at 500-year chunks. To get back to Rav Moshe Shapiro, we looked for a project where we could save lives. Rav Avram Edelstein, another South African who was helping us find these projects, took us to Ukraine and Russia, and he said the one place that we can save lives in the Jewish world today is in the former Soviet Union, where Jews, or particularly Jewish kids, were on the streets, in the sewers.
Because of the poverty?
Because of the poverty, because of after the fall of the Soviet Union, the economies really went to dread, and there was no safety net. So you had literally thousands of Jewish kids in dire situations. And the one place, or two places that we found that were looking for Jewish orphans and Jewish kids at risk were Tikva in Ukraine, in Odessa, and Yad Yisrael in Pinsk. So it is Rabbi Baksht and Rafael Kruskel in Odessa, and Moshe Fima in Pinsk. And we went away and basically designed a project to rescue initially 100 kids. So we challenged them we asked them if we gave them half of the budget of 100 kids for the following year, would they be able to go and find 100 children for us? And to cut a long story short, they did. And that launched our project saving Jewish kids in the former Soviet Union. And from those 100 kids, between these two organizations, they went from about 150 children at any one point in time. Now, 15 years later, combined between them, they're probably 500 kids they're taking care of at any one point in time.
Unbelievable. So this is an orphanage? What are they
Yeah.
doing, these kids? Are they trying to put them into permanent homes, into foster care?
It's quite complicated there. Essentially what happens is the kids come in. If they can go home, we try to get them home. Otherwise, we really take them into our care and we give them a home, education, give them a community, and ultimately what we're seeing is they're coming out of the other end of the system and the process, or I wouldn't say out of the other end of the system, out of the other end of the home, functional, normal, most of the time successful, rounded people who understand what a home should look like. And not only has that happened, the over 800 children born to alumni of the homes in these places.
Wow. How do you model family in an institutional setting?
So it's not easy, but it all boils down to people and role models. So we've got fantastic people living there, working there, our teachers, our families. Even though the kids are living in the homes, they spend in the institutions, they spend a lot of time in the homes of our staff, seeing how families work and should work. It's all about the role models.
Yeah. Do you invest Jewish education into these places as well?
Yeah. So the kids have got a strong Jewish education. They learn English, they learn Hebrew, they learn...
A little Russian, maybe?
Russian, kind of Russian is everything, right? And we try to give them a great secular education, and we try to give them a real Jewish education. And I think these kids in Odessa and Pinsk now are getting certainly a far stronger Jewish education than I got as a kid.
Wow.
And they're learning Hebrew as a spoken language, so when, please God, they end up getting to Israel, they can fit right in.
How often do you go visit these places?
Normally they're a couple times a year.
A couple times a year.
Yeah, and but because we've now become active also in fundraising, we spend a lot of time with the people that are running them.
Interesting. So you
number
go
of
with
times
them.
a year. Yeah. So spend a lot of time traveling around the States, South Africa.
Who do you try to raise from Russian oligarchs or who?
We haven't had great success from oligarchs.
Surprised.
Yeah, I was very surprised at the beginning. The oligarchs got a different way of approaching philanthropy. They're doing some great work, but there is a different approach, and fundamentally, the culture really was not one of giving. The Soviet Union was a very selfish place.
Sure.
It was a tough, hard, selfish place where you had to really be on your toes and take what you can out of the system. And I think that there was a huge change there has been a huge change of mindset from what's in it for me and how can I get the most out of it to how can I help others.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some huge philanthropy coming from the oligarchs, but it tends to be more focused on the West and supporting projects outside of the former Soviet Union, obviously with some big notable exceptions, but we haven't had great success and interesting or generating interest amongst Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs in supporting our projects.
So you've been just
It
going
might
to
it might have been our fault, but the question often comes up: how did South Africans end up supporting Jews in Ukraine? So first of all, we came in late to the game. The big donors initially were American and English. Ed and Keith Frankel and their families. Seth Gersberg in the States, the Schimmel family in London. These were the big donors who really launched these institutions. And then we came in later as South Africans. And I think that we followed in their footsteps. We were, and I'm at a leadership conference now. What is leadership? Leadership is really stepping into the void when nobody else happens to be there. We don't consider ourselves leaders. We just kind of consider ourselves people doing what has got to be done. And the fact that we've got no family connections to Ukraine at all really wasn't part of the calculus. If you walk past a river and a kid's drowning, you don't say, well, is that kid from my hometown? You just dive in and save him. And that's kind of how we saw Ukraine.
Wow. Can you close with any stories about maybe one or two particular kids that you met that would sort of be emblematic of this rehabilitation process that you've invested so much in?
There've been a lot of stories. There've been hundreds of stories, but we had a fundraiser in London last week, and a young woman stood up, confident, polished, And we figured out she must have been 2 or 3 years old on our first trip to Ukraine. She was living at home with her mother, who died of alcoholism. She moved into the home age 6, and now at age 18, she's standing in front of a crowd of 300 people in London, speaking perfect English, telling a story. And the woman who was with her also had come through the home. She was showing her around London, had left her kids at home in Ukraine with her husband and was there with her. So I think that in itself is a story. You know, a kid who Lahavdil would have been on the streets, both of them would have probably been on the streets, are now, you know, just doing great, living good, balanced, normal lives, successful in their careers and their homes. You know, I was sitting there crying just seeing this, trying to pretend not to, but seeing that was real.
Well, it's a fascinating story and a really unique direction for philanthropic investment, and I don't think something people think much about. I certainly didn't know anything about it, but an amazing outlet for those resources that you've been blessed with. And I guess you've really been answering Ellie Horn's question in many ways. What were you put here for? At least in part to give a chance at life to hundreds or thousands of kids and the generations that will come after them. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today.
Good, thank you.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.